On this edition of Jerusalem Dateline, Israel prepares for Benjamin Netanyahu's return as prime minister. Why some fear Israel's relationship with the U.S. could be tested in the months ahead. Plus, an ancient monastery discovered in the United Arab Emirates. What it says about the history of Christianity in the Middle East. Plus, see a Ukrainian pastor's miraculous escape from Russian captivity. And meet the man on a mission to bring Christian leaders to Israel. All this and more on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Israeli President Isaac Herzog has announced he will assign Benjamin Netanyahu and his Likud party to form Israel's next government. While President Biden has congratulated Netanyahu, there are signs the administration is concerned about other leaders in this new right-wing government. As part of his presidential duties, Isaac Herzog met with all the parties that qualified for the next parliament and asked who they wanted to form the next coalition. A majority chose Likud, which means Benjamin Netanyahu is slated to become Israel's next prime minister. Netanyahu's political comeback represents a choice by many Israelis for a safer country and one with a greater Jewish identity. It also represents a big shift from the former government of Yair Lapid, with its center-led parties along with an Islamist party.
This time, a right-wing coalition won a very clear majority in the government. Now, with the religious and right-wing parties winning a majority, liberals around the world, and particularly in America, are saying that this government is a threat to democracy, that this government is the end of an open liberal Israel, that this government is going to result in a harming of ties between Israel and America.
Already, the U.S. is pushing back on policies the new government may consider. U.S. Ambassador Tom Knight says the U.S. will oppose any attempts to annex parts of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. And the State Department condemned Itamar Ben-Gvir for participating in an event celebrating the legacy of Meir Kahane and his organization that's designated as a terrorist group. CBN News political analyst John Waggy says the new coalition is likely to find itself on the opposite side of the White House on a number of issues.
First of all, be the two-state solution. I mean, the Biden administration has clearly been moving in a direction where they want to press Israel again to negotiate with the Palestinians and to move toward a two-state solution. That's not something that any Netanyahu government for the last 12, 13 years has been interested in.
Kontorovich says in light of the results, the Biden administration should respect the will of the people.
The people vote for a right-wing government, so when the United States president says, hey, you better watch out, if you make a right-wing government, it can harm our ties, that's essentially telling Netanyahu to ignore the will of the Israeli people, to ignore the democratic electoral expression of that will. That's undemocratic.
Americans also went to the polls recently to determine who controls Congress in the midterm elections. I spoke with Rabbi Abraham Cooper from the Simon Wiesenthal Center about how these elections could influence U.S.-Israel relations. Rabbi Abraham Cooper, great to see you back here on Jerusalem Dateline. Tell me, U.S. is having elections right now. Sometimes the results are not in, but the Israeli elections are in. What do you think about the impact of that upon U.S.-Israel relations?
Right. Well, first of all, for both elections, proving Churchill's point that democracy is the worst form of government except any other form of government. We don't know yet the full outcome in the U.S., but generally it's a healthier democracy when one party doesn't control all three forms of government. As for the Israeli elections, it's kind of a blood sport. A lot of questions about two individuals who are deemed extremists in terms of their views about Arabs, etc. My first reaction is BP Netanyahu is the master at moving pieces around in his coalition, etc., etc. He's going to have to look carefully to make sure that those voices don't override the main goals of the government over the next 5 years. Yeah. And I think he'll do okay. I'm an outsider. I mean, I pay taxes here, I guess, because of grandchildren. I'm not a citizen or a voter. And I would say that eventually having a coalition government that's much broader, national unity, is always the best thing, but I think we're a long way off from that. Mm-hmm. When I explain to my American friends like what's going on, for that, I say, look, for many Israelis, this was a law and order election. You have shootings every day. You had the riots, in a mixed Jewish Arab city, a lot of unease. And I think when you have those kinds of votes, it means because that at the grassroots, a lot of people don't feel comfortable and they worry about what's going to happen to the kids when they go to school, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And that's paralleled in a lot of cities across the United States, including where I live in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Also, you have an article, there's an article in the Jerusalem Post talking about anti-Semitism, a serious incident in Chicago. What do you see in the U.S. in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism? And how concerning is that to you?
Well, it's extremely disconcerting when you have, little kids coming home on a school bus from a Jewish day school, and 4 adults jump onto the bus, Sieg heiling and threatening 12-year-olds. Obviously tremendously traumatic. Could have been a lot worse. The bus driver managed to get them off. This is a kind of an event that would, I think, be unthinkable just a few years ago. Social media is the accelerant here for all the extremists. And it's a 24/7 targeting of Jews, of Asians, of other minorities. And it's a very strange time now, really, in our history. I can go walk anywhere in the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain any time of day and night with my kippah, and there are neighborhoods in some of the largest Jewish populated cities in the United States where you have to look over your shoulder. We're going to need new coalitions. We have to build on old friendships, and I think rely less on the straight sort of political activity, get back to basics in the community, build coalitions, work together with our Christian and Muslim friends to make sure that we have a safe society.
Final question, Rabbi Cooper, talking about the UAE, you're on your way there, and that's some positive news here in the Middle East.
Well, there's no question. I was just in Bahrain, where I saw the King of Bahrain, the Pope, and the head of Al-Azhar University sitting together and all speaking about tolerance. It was kind of quite a very, very special moment. We have a lot more work to do on building out the DNA of the peace accords, and also spreading the message to other countries. Hopefully that'll happen sooner rather than later.
Hope so too. Rabbi Cooper, great to be with you.
Thank you, Chris.
Archaeologists recently made a stunning discovery on an island off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, an ancient Christian monastery that possibly predates Islam. This discovery sheds light on early Christian history in the Arabian Peninsula.
There's this really fascinating forgotten chapter of Arab history. We know that the Arab tribes who lived here in this region and more broadly in Eastern Arabia were Christian at the time of the rise of Islam. And that that some of them continued to be Christian for up to 3 generations after the rise of Islam.
This monastery is the second one to be discovered in the UAE from the same time period. Well, here in Israel, archaeologists have unearthed an ivory comb dating back nearly 4,000 years at the Tel Yakish archaeological site in southern Israel. This comb contains the oldest known full sentence written in the Canaanite language. The inscription reads, "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." It's evidence that ancient Canaanites struggled with lice, just like people do today. The researchers published their findings in the Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology. Coming up, a Ukrainian pastor makes a miraculous escape from Russian captivity. See his incredible faith in action. Imprisoned, interrogated, and miraculously set free. That's one pastor's story from the Ukrainian city of Kherson. It's been occupied by the Russians since early in the war. And now, as the Ukrainian military presses forward, Russia says its forces are retreating. Meanwhile, stories of atrocities and escape are emerging. Chuck Holton has the story from Kyiv.
Kherson residents board buses under forced evacuation orders from the Russian army as Ukrainian troops close in on the city. For 8 months, life has been tough as people face shortages of just about everything and harsh treatment by Russian military.
On the left bank, the occupiers continue to intimidate and kidnap people. In recent weeks, we witnessed them kidnapping one couple, and the next day a woman was hanged in the center of Skatovsk just because she said Skatovsk is Ukraine. So the occupiers continue the intimidation of the population, with the kidnapping of people in the occupied territories.
Losing Kherson would cost Moscow the land bridge it so desperately wanted between the Donbass and Crimea, areas it occupied in 2014. It would also allow Ukrainian artillery to get that much closer to Crimea. Worse still, a loss here would provide more evidence that Russian forces are on the brink of collapse.
He faces a situation that I think, again, is irreversible. There's no amount of shambolic mobilization, which is the only way to describe it, no amount of annexation, no amount of even veiled nuclear threats can actually get him out of this particular situation.
Those forced to live under Russian occupation, however, say liberation can't come soon enough. After 6 months in occupied Kherson, Pastor Alexander escaped the city with his wife and 10 children.
When the Russians took over, we weren't sure what to do, but we decided to continue with our church services.
Russian forces, on the lookout for so-called Nazis, searched his house several times. On September 6th, they arrested him in front of his wife and children.
I was kept in solitary confinement for 6 days. When they put me in a cell where there were 7 people but only 3 beds.
During interrogation, the Russians tried to prove he was a Nazi, ironically because of an English Bible in his office. Pastor Alexander was more worried about photos on his phone.
Many Americans donated to help with the construction of our church. He accused me of being an American agent. He was just looking for a reason to keep me. On my phone, there was a lot of evidence of my cooperation volunteering with the Army. So that became my prayer that they would not even see my phone, and Lord closed their eyes to it.
Between interrogations, he shared his faith with his cellmates.
My wife had managed to slip me a small Bible. So with that, I started witnessing to the other men and myself were there together for another 10 days. But the 7th day, they had all made Jesus Christ the Lord. That was when I finally realized why I was there.
Alexander had no idea if he would ever see his family again.
While I was being interrogated, the commandant said, if it was up to me, I would shoot all of you right now and throw you in the landfill. They hate Ukrainians so much. They cannot even stand to hear the word Ukraine.
Then, after 15 days of captivity, a miracle happened.
An Orthodox priest, whom I had never met before, came to the commandant and asked him to release me. And he agreed on one condition, that he could keep my car. So at the church there was still a minivan, and we put all my family into it, along with the injured neighbor, and we headed toward the front lines.
Their ordeal wasn't over. It took 4 days and lots of prayer to get through all the checkpoints to reach friendly lines.
I saw such joy in my children's eyes when they first came upon Ukrainians. They saw a soldier and said, look, they don't have masks. The Russians are all walking around in masks. And I said, that's because they have nothing to hide. Bandits always wear masks.
Pastor Alexander and his family are now staying here in Kyiv and working with the local church while they pray for God's direction about when they should go home. But as Ukrainian forces move closer and closer to the city of Kherson, that day could come sooner rather than later.
I know that He will continue taking care of us, so I'm trying to seek first the kingdom of God and wait for everything else.
From Ukraine, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Up next, hear from a Christian leader whose personal mission is to help other pastors develop a heart for Israel. People visiting Israel for the first time tend to agree that it's a life-changing experience. We met up with a friend at the Garden Tomb here in Jerusalem who wants to make this happen for as many pastors as possible. Bishop Robert Stearns, great to be with you here in the Garden Tomb. Last month we were there at the TBN studios when you had the Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem that went worldwide. Tell us why you're here in the Garden Tomb today.
We're here with a group of 30 pastors who've never been to Israel, because I believe it is absolutely important that we pass on to the next generation of Christian leaders a biblical understanding of the importance of Israel and the church's connection to the Jewish people. We've been traveling all across the land, and these pastors have just had their heart and their mind expanded to see not only what did God do in this land thousands of years ago, but what is God doing here today, and how do we as believers link to the miracle of Israel today?
For a young generation, a millennial generation, to understand the right narrative. There's been so many challenges, I know, in America with what is the role of Israel? Why do we care about that role? And what do we do to partner together and to find the roots of our faith? What does that look like today? And so that's something that we're seeing, just a revelation in these young pastors, to see their eyes open, and for the first time, many of them realizing, I get it.
Oh my gosh, Bishop Robert Stearns and his trips have been so impactful in so many different ways. I think one of the greatest dynamics is just the personal touch of the heart of God, his passion for the land and the people, what it means to engage with what God has on your life as he's woven it into the story. So I've seen so much in the last 10 days, and if anyone was, I would recommend to go on a trip with him. If anyone were asking, hey, who I would go with or where should I be engaging with, I would definitely say Eagles Wings and Bishop Robert Stearns. It's been phenomenal time.
I think we read the Bible in black and white. When you come here, you see it in color. It comes alive, it pops off the pages, and it reminds you that these things are historical, that they're accurate, that they happen, but it also reminds us that we serve an everlasting God, a living God who's alive and well today, just like when he walked the steps of Jerusalem. Every pastor should make their way to Israel. It will make their teaching, their revelation, their insight more alive than it ever was before. It gives practical application. You get to see proximity. I don't think we understand how close something was or how distant something was until you're actually on the ground. You see it up close and for real. It will help their teaching to be more practical and more relevant to their congregants.
The Judeo-Christian world, the Western world, faces twin threats in our generation. There is the threat of a radicalized Islam, which we see in Iran, we see in Syria, and then in their proxies here, Hamas, Hezbollah. This is a very, very real threat. And we face the threat of radical secularism, a radical humanism that is absolutely opposed to anyone who believes in the God of the Bible. And this is the twin threat that is facing the Judeo-Christian world right now. Jews and Christians stand together, united, as we work for our children and our grandchildren, needing to come together as never before and cooperate with what we agree on. Certainly there's areas of theological difference between the Jewish and Christian communities. We don't minimize those areas of difference, but there is so much that we agree on. And in the light of these twin threats of radical Islam and radical humanism, it's more important than ever that Jews and Christians work together. I believe all over the world, even as we see political change, sometimes political things that are concerning to us, I believe there is a remnant church rising. I absolutely believe there is a people whose hearts are turned toward the Lord, and that in this hour, God is gathering a remnant people for such a time as this. And those people are praying for the peace of Jerusalem, working for the peace of Jerusalem. And I believe that even, the prophet says, darkness will cover the earth, gross darkness the peoples, but the light of God will arise upon you. We're living in a moment where the light of God is arising upon a remnant church in the nations. It's a time to look up and rejoice.
Amen. Encouraging word. Bishop Robert Stearns, great to be with you.
Always an honor to be with you, Chris.
Coming up next, see how a young mom is making a new life in Israel with her son, with the support of viewers like you. Thank you for watching Jerusalem Dateline. We're committed to providing you with unbiased reporting from the Holy Land. Through weekly broadcasts, podcasts, and online media, our vision is to reach millions around the globe with the true story of what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, all from a biblical and prophetic perspective. This is a big vision and is only made possible by the generous support of people like you.
Call us toll-free at 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/Jerusalem Dateline and make a donation that will help spread the light of truth about Israel throughout the world.
Over the last few years, tens of thousands of Jews from around the world have returned to their ancestral homeland. For many, it's not an easy journey, and that's why CBN Israel is there to help.
Masha Poplovsky moved from Ukraine to Israel, hoping to make a better life for her son, Daniel.
It's very hard to raise a child in Ukraine. There aren't many jobs, and the war has made things difficult. Being a Jew, I had always heard about Israel, and it was my dream to come here.
Masha and her son stayed with Ukrainian friends when they first arrived. But the apartment was very small, and the friends soon asked her and Daniel to leave.
I was very depressed. I wanted to make it on my own, but I didn't know the language or how to find a job or an apartment yet. I was scared we would have to go back to Ukraine.
When CBN Israel learned about Masha, we invited her to come live in the House of Life, a place where single moms who need some extra help can stay free of charge.
I was very nervous at first, but the CBN people spoke Russian and made me feel very comfortable. I made friends with the other girls very quickly.
We taught Masha how to budget her finances and build a resume. She learned the basics of living in Israel and saved money while staying in the house. We also provided Masha and Daniel with good meals every day.
The people there really became my family, and I learned so much in the house. It was a great experience.
Masha and her son recently moved into their own apartment. Today, Masha supports Daniel on her own, but we still visit just to make sure they're okay.
There is no way we would have made it without your help. This situation in Ukraine is terrible for my baby, so going back would have been horrible. We were only able to stay in Israel because CBN helped us in every way possible. Thank you for that.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.